I'd like to introduce you to Brian Smalley. He is the Executive Vice President of Marketing and Sales at National Steel Car. He joined National Steel Car in October of 2015 as Senior Director of Marketing and Sales and has been promoted to his current role as part of the company's long-term succession planning. As Executive Vice President of Marketing and Sales, Smalley is responsible for the marketing, sales, and leasing of rail cars in the U.S. and Mexico. He oversees a team that has contributed to the continued growth of National Steel Cars customer base and provided operational excellence, resulting in the overall success of the company. Prior to joining National Steel Car, Smalley served as a United States Marine for over 15 years, earning the rank of captain. Welcome, Brian. I look forward to talking to you.
Welcome. I look forward to it.
So, if you don't mind, let's start at the very beginning. And what are the aha moments you've had that put you on the journey to one, become a Marine, and then two, get into the railroad industry?
Man, Darshan, that's a lot of question right there to unpack. I would say that as a young man many years ago, I realized that without challenge, we never really hit our full potential. And so I was going to college, kind of going through the motions, and realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't me. It wasn't fit. It was what was expected of me, but not necessarily where I was at that time. So my aha moment in that was if I didn't do something incredible to challenge myself, then I would never be able to realize my potential. Joining the Marine Corps Infantry was probably a little bit of a stretch and not necessarily what people think about when they consider challenging themselves. It wasn't climbing a mountain or traveling but I knew that I needed to have something that pushed me beyond what I thought I could do. So that was my aha was, if I don't do something, then I'm going to be forever in a loop and a pattern that won't allow me to realize my potential.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oftentimes we talk on the show with guests, and we talked about the difference between thriving and surviving. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? You wanted to thrive, but you also did something that many people have a challenge doing, and that is going against what's comfortable. You wanted to actually challenge yourself. Do you recall what made you really want to do that?
Quite frankly, no. Too many head injuries, I guess, but my memory doesn't extend to what exactly was going on in the moment. I know that it was just an epiphany that I had that I was not fulfilling what I felt in my heart was my purpose. I knew that it was something that, as you said, was very comfortable and I could have stayed with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I knew myself personally that there were many more adventures and many more challenges and many more evolutions that I needed to go through personally. And the only way to do that was to do something rather extreme.
So you joined the Marines, and I'm sure you had some aha moments in the Marine Corps. So what were some of the initial aha moments you had there?
The Marine Corps was a very formative time in my life. And I think when I realized that the discipline that they instill, the development of discipline leads you to freedom in a sense. Everybody talks about the Marine Corps as being the most strict, as being the most focused. The term that is often used is, Marines are more cultish in a way because if you drive around anywhere in America, you're going to see Marine Corps stickers. And we are the smallest branch. We have the smallest budget, but we do have an outsized impact. And I think that one of the things I realized is that our reputation, our successes, and our capabilities came from the discipline. Because when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, when you're that young, that immature, you have a tendency of not recognizing the elements for what they are. So what I mean that is, you see discipline as, oh, they just want to yell at me. They just want to control me. But what they were in reality doing was instilling this sense of self-discipline that came later. And with self-discipline, you can have a lot of freedom because you're not so tied up with minutia. You're not distracted by everything. You're not getting pulled. And as you move through and you identify what your strengths and weaknesses are through that discipline and you work to correct them, it gives you the ability to move forward in areas and aspects of your life that you may not have realized without that discipline.
What I'm hearing from you, it sounds like it gave you a sense of confidence and focus at the same time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, 100%. Recognizing that when I go into a situation, I may not have all the skills, I may not have all the knowledge, I may not have all the experience that allows me to attack whatever is in front of me with, I would say, complete knowledge that I'm going to do it. But what I did realize, and what I do realize, is that with determination, with identifying the elements of the situation, you can find a solution that may seem daunting to you in situations that you've never been faced with before. And that confidence in not the fact that I know everything or I can do everything, but I can figure everything out. And also self-identification on, yeah, I'm not so good at skydiving. I'm not so good at swimming in the ocean, without fearing for a shark or something like that. There are limitations that you come with confidence that you don't feel are weaknesses. You just recognize that not everybody is designed for everything.
So it sounds like, yeah, it's also a bit of learning how to be critical thinking and knowing that there's always a way to solve a problem. You just got to put your mind to it and figure it out. And how has that helped you throughout the rest of your career after that?
One of the biggest things I have tried to develop is stepping back and removing emotion from a situation, because I think a lot of people don't see a solution because they're so wrapped up in how they feel about a situation or a particular instance in time. And so they don't try to understand the issue. So if you step back, you look at all the facets, you look at all the angles, you say in an interpersonal exchange, if you don't agree with somebody, if you step back and try to understand what helped form their opinion, where are they coming from, what are their interests, what are their likes, desires, thoughts, experiences that contribute to this opposite idea or opposite position of yours, it helps you understand how to work through it, how to create compromise, how to solve an issue. So when you look at something, you can be overwhelmed by several factors. It's not that hard to look at a problem that you've never faced before and say, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I have. But if you step back, look at it objectively, look at it logically, understand what you have, and try to understand the other side of the fence, if you will, it gives you a great perspective to try to figure out, what are my openings? What are my gaps? Where are my areas that I can go into? What are my strengths and weaknesses, and how do they offset on the opposite side? Or with the challenge that you're given, what are the structural components of that my strengths are good for? Where are my areas of weakness? And really identify how to tackle a problem bit by bit to overcome something that you may have never faced, that may seem overwhelming, that may be a challenge. Or also, it can lead you down a path to, this is not a good idea. And, quick example of that is when I got an MBA from Gonzaga, we were actually doing a capstone project to put in a biofuels refinery 20 years ago, 19 years ago. And one of the things that we came to realize was that the project was not viable for a wide variety of factors. But without that self-recognition, without that ability to look at a problem dispassionately and not fall in love with a plan, we would not have been able to step back, and we may have committed resources that would have been essentially lost without a gain. But having that dispassionate look at it and that logical aspect allowed us to make that decision, which was hard.
So are there any insights or tips you can give on how to remove some of the emotion out of it and then, look at it logically and systematically? But then at some point, I think you have to factor in back the emotion a little bit, right?
Absolutely. I do believe that emotion has its place, but it shouldn't have a control. It's the same element as when you're driving a car. There's a lot of factors that come in. What is the speed limit? What is the traffic? What are the road conditions? What is your car? What is your car capable of? You have to bring all those together when you're making decisions as you're driving. The same with emotions. If you allow your emotions to be the driving factor, sometimes emotions, we've all been afraid of things. The first time I drove a car, I was terrified. Of course, it was Alaska in the winter, and it was, sheer ice. And My dad was, let's just say, not quite as patient all the time. In this case, he was really good, but still, I was terrified. And if I had allowed that emotion to control that aspect, I would never have learned how to drive or learned how to drive well because it always would have been a controlling factor. So, you take that to your point that emotion does have a sense, you do have to have some level of concern when you're driving about the safety of your family, yourself, the people around you. But it should not be the driving emotion, or it should not be the driving factor rather in your activity.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's a factor, but not the factor.
Exactly. 100%. 100%. If you're not passionate about something, then how can you commit resources? But you can't allow your passion to blind you to fall in love with a plan or a course of action. So your passion can drive you, but it also has to be tempered by reality and, I would say, resource limitations. So to get that, that's been going through a lot of challenges. That's been going through a lot of struggles. It was, I would say, not something that I had an aha moment in. I would say over the course of a minute and said, "Hey, this." It was more of a long term aha moment. Looking at my past, looking at the way that I handled myself, looking at what factors led to my decisions, good or bad, and trying to recognize, okay, what are some of the things and some of the elements? And I just realized that whenever I allowed emotion to take a driving force, it made me act in a way that may not have been appropriate to the situation because I wasn't looking at things holistically. I was just looking at it from my perspective and how I felt in that moment, which may or may not have been an accurate reflection of what that moment really was.
Right. And you're reacting, but not maybe taking in the entire picture.
Perfect, perfect way to put it.
So you're in the Marine Corps, and I'm sure you've traveled around the world. What are some aha moments you've had doing that?
When I was a young man, we went to Germany and with my family on a visit. And I just remember everybody there they were polite, but not necessarily very forthcoming. They weren't quite as helpful. And then a couple years later, we went to another visit to Europe. We went to Norway, and it was the same type of scenario. But the difference was in Norway, there was a high level of American English taught. I won't say it's American or British, but I was very young, so I couldn't tell the difference at the time. But anyways, regardless, English was very common in Norway, and it created an ability to communicate and to, I would say, it was a better experience because of that ability to communicate, which led me to understand the culture better and had a very wonderful experience. I mean, both were wonderful, but it felt that in Norway I was much more tuned into the culture, tuned into the people, tuned into the visit itself, and made it a much richer experience. So carrying that forward in the Marine Corps, I came to realize that having an understanding of the language, having an understanding of the culture, having an understanding and appreciation for the differences of where I was at was incredible. I had studied a little bit of Japanese in school. Languages became something of interest to me when I was young and carried that through. So when I was in the Marine Corps, I deployed to Japan a couple of times, and it made for a richer experience. I was able to communicate at a very, very basic level, but I could see the appreciation that people had. There wasn't this, I don't know if this is the best word for it, but this arrogance that, I can come to your country without having some sort of respect for it. It was hey, look, this guy's trying to speak Japanese. This guy's, he's showing appreciation. He understands some of the smaller nuances of the culture. And that was really taken well and created opportunities for me that I would say other people didn't have because they didn't try to adapt or carry that on. And that's something I've used throughout my life. My wife and I went to Europe. We went to Italy, and Spanish is spoken in my house. I don't do it very well, but it is a very common language in my house. And Prior to going, we studied Italian, which we found a lot of similarities between the two. So when we went to Italy, we were able to navigate Rome with a much better, I would say, understanding of what was going on, how things were happening. There's a lot of people in Rome. There's a lot of Americans in Rome, and it just seemed that some of the experiences that we heard or saw didn't quite have as much richness and fullness that we were able to get because we could interact with some of the people there, and there was appreciation for it. So
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. A lot of times people think when they travel, they have to be able to speak the language perfectly. And that's not necessarily the case. I think more than anything, if you just make the attempt and they see that you're trying to, they'll then help you. And more than anything, they appreciate it. And you're right, it does open up a lot more, a lot of other experiences that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So after the Marine Corps, you go into the railroad industry. What's the aha moment that led you into the railroad industry?
I would say that my aha moment was when I came out of the Marine Corps. I had a perception of sales that was a very metric based used car salesman approach. And when I first came out, I tried to go into operations. The problem was there was not a strong fit for me in many operations where I was happy and they were happy. When you come out and you're going into operations with a company, you need to understand the company. I'm not saying that it was incorrect for people to look at me and go, you need to start at the base, because rightly so, I need to learn the company. I need to learn the people, the culture, the activities that go on. And I was assuming that because of my experience as a Marine, operations, planning, execution, leadership, I thought these skills would translate directly over. What I found is that there was often times where there were so many nuances that if you don't start at the bottom, that you're not going to be able to successfully manage at the top. And the self-realization was I had a much higher expectation than reality, and I needed to broaden my horizons. I had been an officer recruiter, an officer selection officer. The last few years I was in the Marine Corps, and sales was a large part of what we did. It was a different type of sales. It was recruiting, but it was still, you have a pipeline, you have discovery, you have objections, you have features, you have benefits. A lot of the same elements for sales is recruiting. You are identifying opportunities, identifying what can fit those opportunities, and trying to ensure that you communicate that across and understand the situation. So my aha moment was that sales doesn't have to be purely transactional. And it doesn't have to have such a stigma that some people may have, that it's all this metric based. You have to make 100 cold calls a day to get 10 good hits. It doesn't have to be, hey, get them away from a topic or don't address this. It's a communication platform. It's a discovery. It's a puzzle. And so when I started looking at sales differently, and when I started understanding that B2B sales can be extremely challenging, can be extremely rich and robust, I had once again, the wrong perception of something that pushed me in a direction that wasn't right. And so by opening up my possibilities and my acceptance of other types of careers, it gave me a drive and a motivation to try to find something in the sales. That's how I got into the rail industry. Was I started off in sales and had my own company for a few years, and then came to National Steel Car in 2015.
So it sounds like you've learned that sales is really more about having conversations and asking questions, not just a one-way conversations, right?
100%. Sales is about uncovering information. It's about developing information. It's about thinking about information. Sales is a complex process because you have to understand so many facets. One of my favorite quotes: people don't make decisions based on the facts. They make decisions based on what the facts mean to them. And that really made me realize that understanding the need behind a need is great. But if you don't understand how different things mean to different people, you're missing a big portion of the toolkit that you need to be successful in sales.
In fact, one of the most successful strategies in sales is a Socratic method, right? Where you actually ask a series of questions.
Yes, exactly. Ask questions, listen to the answers, and not just listen to the answers, listen to the tone behind the answers, listen to the body language, listen to the atmosphere in the room, listen to how they look at other members of their team or how they're looking at you when you ask a question. Look at the method of answering, the pace. I mean, it's, asking questions and uncovering information is an incredible art. There's a science to it, but there's also an art. Oh, absolutely. Picking up on nuance, picking up on tone, picking up on all these things can be very critical to a successful sales career.
So I think what we're talking about is really trying to keep delving into getting those key insights or core truths that actually help you. So have you learned some things that you didn't know early on? Or maybe I should ask it this way. If you were to now train a younger Brian Smalley that was coming into, what tips or things would you tell them about how to gain insights when you're having conversations with customers and sales or whatever?
It is quite common to hear the phrase that you learn more by listening than you do by talking. And many books all talk about listening. Many books talk about uncovering information. I think that I would add to that, it's not just listening, it's observing. It's thinking about the answers because people will say, sometimes they will say things that are comfortable. They will say things that are common. They will say things that are oblique. And how somebody answers a question can be just as important as what they answer the question with. So if you ask somebody a direct question and they give you an answer that is not direct, you have to ask yourself, well, what is it about that information or that question that I'm asking that's causing them to not want to give me a direct answer? Is it that they don't know? Is it that it's confidential? Is it that it would make them admit a weakness? There's all sorts of things that you have to understand when you're listening to people that go beyond just the words that they're saying.
Right. Actually, it could be the issue that's really the real pebble in their shoe, right?
100%. If you're talking to somebody that's new in a position and maybe they're relatively inexperienced in a field, they're new to their position, you ask them a question and they give you a dodge, think about it. I mean, that could just be that they don't know and they don't want to admit that they don't know. And framing up that question with some sense of importance behind it and redirecting that question will cause them to possibly look at, okay, well, I'll get you that answer and I'll get back to you. Having somebody that's very experienced, knows the company, the commodity, the product, the process, or whatever inside and out, has been doing it for decades. This is a common factor for them. And you ask them a question and they dodge. Now you have to wonder, okay, what is it that they don't want me to know? Or why is it that they don't want me to know? But having a knowledge, that full perception of the picture of the who you're meeting with, what you're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to accomplish, what things are important to them, having all of that knowledge before you go into a meeting is critical to understanding what are some of the reasons behind the answers that will allow you to know if you should dig in, if you should back off, if you should find another angle, ask the question differently, give some sort of a reason behind it to validate the purpose of the question. So that's what I would tell my younger self is don't just listen, but observe and have knowledge and try to develop as much knowledge as you can so that when you get an answer, you're understanding a lot of the different elements that make up that answer, especially in sales.
If you think about a lot of times when you have these conversations, whether it's sales or market research, whatever, people aren't really maybe even thinking about what you want to talk about. But as you talk to them and they start thinking more and more about it, that's when you start getting into the deeper kernels that are in their subconscious, because that's ultimately where you're trying to go to find out what they think, feel, and observe and listen to all of that, and then have a better 360 perspective of what's really going on. Correct?
Oh, 100%. And if you don't have their trust, you're not going to get there. If
And
you
that
don't
then the art of developing trust is having that conversation. Correct?
You have to share. You have to be open. You have to be honest. If you don't know, you have to say, I don't know. You may not want to say it directly, but you can say it. You have to be able to admit weakness. You have to be able to show some commonality with whoever you're talking to. You have to develop that playing field to where they're comfortable enough to give you the full picture because they're going to understand you, how you're going to use it, and what your methods and intents are without having that level of trust, that level of relationship, that level of personal relationship. You're only going to get the 30-second elevator speech. You're only going to get what they would put on a website. You're only going to get what they would send in a general announcement. You're not going to get that depth, that kernel, as you said, those deep kernels of information because they don't want to give it to you because they don't trust you. They don't know you.
That's part of it. Sometimes they don't really know until they start talking about it. I mean, it's there, but they haven't had a need to articulate it, and that's actually what you're trying to do is get them to somehow articulate it, whether it's physically or verbally, or somehow be able to articulate that kernel. And then that's where I think you're correct. It's a combination of listening, but also observing, and that's a big part of it. And insights are not just one factor; it's multiple factors put together to give you the total picture. So then you're in the railroad industry. What are some aha moments you've had now working in transportation and dealing with, I'm sure, mostly bigger organizations that are looking much more into the future than probably most other products and things, correct?
Absolutely. Rail cars are they're a high value, long life asset. Without diving too much into the specifics of it, you're talking units. One rail car is anywhere from call it 100,000 to 150,000 dollars US. And people don't order five of them. They order 150. I mean, yes, there are smaller orders, but typically your order pattern is 150 to 200 cars. So you're talking a very high dollar asset or very high dollar transactions. They're 50-year assets, and they're not necessarily the core of many of my customers' business. My customers, they make chemicals, they provide grain, they ship commodities. They don't have rail as a core of their company, even though logistics is critical to everything. I think it was, I can't remember the exact quote from Sun Tzu, but it was, tactics win battles, but logistics win wars. And the value of that can be seen throughout history in business, in uh, economies, in conflicts, where your logistics are a core piece. But if people don't come into that thinking that rail and rail equipment is critical to their business, it makes it a very challenging sale. So I would say some of the aha moments I had were understanding the different drivers that people have, realizing that just because I have a more efficient rail car doesn't necessarily mean that that's important to somebody. Just because I have and I'll give you, one example, leaving the names out for everybody's confidentiality. But I had one customer that every time I walked in, he told me cheap, cheap, cheap. He goes, cheap, 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 Brian. It's all I care about. And then I'd come back and, we wouldn't get the deal. And I'd come back 6 or 12 months later and he'd be complaining about this quality issue and that quality issue and the new cars that he was building. And I'd look at him and I go, hey man, what about cheap, cheap, cheap? He's like, just stop. It was all in good fun. We were good friends. What I came to realize is that he had to get board approval, and his company was based in Asia. So the understanding of rail logistics was not something that was common for the companies in Asia. They a lot of the cargo goes by a vessel or their delivery is to the US in a container. They don't understand, at least his company didn't understand the challenges and nuances of rail shipping. So all they cared about was what is my total cost to purchase the asset. And with rail cars, it's, we manufacture them in Canada. Our peers, most of our peers, about 70% of rail is manufactured down in Mexico. But all of them have a cost of the car, but then a cost to move the car to their location. And that cost can be thousands of dollars. So you've got an asset, call it $100,000 asset, but you can add 6 to 10% in cost because the freight is $6 or $10,000. So what they looked at was not the long-term quality total cost of ownership. They didn't look at the total delivered cost. All they looked at was how much is this car going to cost, because that was their capital expenditure. Any freight costs were part of operating cost. So it didn't mean anything to my contact because he wasn't presenting what is my end of service freight. All he was presenting to his board of directors was, here's 1,000 cars for $100 million, or here's 1,000 cars for $110 million, acquisition cost only. So the board didn't come back to him and say, what do you think? They looked at it based on the information, and they looked at it without the idea of the total cost of ownership. They looked at it without the freight. They looked at it without the delivery reliability. They looked at it with only one factor in mind. So what I came to realize is that not only understanding the need behind the need, but understanding the way that people look at things and going back to it, what the facts mean to them, and how it all plays a part. I think that was one of the biggest aha moments I had in rail. Was just because I have a high quality product, just because I have delivery reliability, just because I can manufacture the most optimal piece of equipment for your commodity, doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to win the deal, because it may not matter to them.
Yeah, I think at some point you impressed upon him, you got to look at the total cost of ownership and lifetime, right? Cost, not just the acquisition cost.
That's 100% it. And that I realized that I could tell my contact that all day long, but he did not have the ability to share that philosophy with his board of directors that made the decision. So I had to understand that dynamic going into it so that we could focus on what really mattered to him.
What should we know about what's going to happen to the future of rail in the United States?
Well, hopefully it will continue to grow. I think that rail is a very economic, sustainable platform for transportation of goods. We have a much lower carbon emission than compared to our peers on the trucking side. And I think that when you look at the impact to infrastructure, rail maintains its own infrastructure, whereas, the highway system is all public funded. So one of the things I would think that you were going to see in the rail industry is some sustained and continued growth. The movement of goods is not anything that's decreasing over time. You get your temporary ups and downs with the economy and imports and corn crops and those types of things. But overall, it's a robust, even though it's mature, it's a robust industry that has some growth potential to it.
And so when are we going to get our bullet trains?
Man, that's a whole different topic. I think there are some structural issues to overcome, some cultural issues to overcome, and then some economic issues to overcome, because those aren't cheap. We love our cars here in America.
Yeah, that's for sure. So what do you see in the future for you? Where are you going to be seeking new aha moments for you?
I think as I have moved up, there have been many opportunities for me to learn. And going into the next phase of my career, if you will, because this position is relatively new, what are we at? 9.5 months here that I've been in it. And I've realized that there has to be some development of, I would say, executive thought, that the transition from just going from sales to executive and executive level of sales means that it's not only an external sale, it's an internal sale. So my aha moment was, I've always known that you have to sell both sides, right? You have to sell internally, you have to sell externally. But as I've moved up into the executive levels, I've realized that it's a different type of sale, if you will, much longer term, much more dispassionate, meaning that, I want to close deals. That's what salespeople like to do, right? We like to close deals. We like to win. You have to step back and say, are those wins good? Are those wins the most economically viable successes, or do they preclude other opportunities or options that may or may not be good. So stepping back and looking at a holistic view of the industry, the company, the team, my aha moment is I have a much broader platform that I have to consider when making decisions or pushing in directions.
Yeah, it sounds like you have to help craft a bit of the vision for the future, but also help sell that vision, right? Because it's a combination of also motivating and inspiring at the same time.
Well, absolutely. And nobody in sales likes to hear, no, we're not going to go hard after that opportunity, even though you're pretty sure we can win it if we do this. No salesperson likes to hear that. We all like to hear, yeah, we're gonna cut the price, we're gonna do delivery, we're gonna do everything the customer wants so that you can win this order. So it's a management, right? It's a managing of expectations. It's a developing that understanding of how do you approach that on the strategic level, but also how do you communicate that back down to the tactical level of the importance of why you did not make a decision.
So tell me, if you could have lunch or dinner with anyone in your industry, who would it be and why?
That's a good question. I would say that Joe Henricks of CSX would be somebody that I would like to have dinner with. Joe did not come from a rail background. He came from outside the rail. He was a longtime automotive. Um, he was an executive at many levels and took over CSX as a CEO about a year ago. And to understand how he came into an industry where he brought in some very excellent, very experienced skill sets, but not the rail experience, and how he handled folks that, oh, I've been running railroads for 30 or 40 years. How are you going to tell me you ran a car manufacturer? How are you going to tell me how to run a railroad? And to learn how he has approached change management, because I think change management is one of the most difficult aspects of leadership that anybody can face, but it is the most common. We're always changing. We're always evolving. Our industry is evolving. The demographics of our industry are evolving. The internal processes have to evolve. The equipment evolve. Everything is evolving. So everything requires change management. And he has done a very good job of doing that in an industry which is not known for change. We're still shipping rail cars on the same, the common story in the rail industry is that in America, we put our rail in because to a gauge, a certain width of the track, because we use the engineers from England. They had all the tools and the dies because they put the rail tracks in England based on the width of the wagon ruts in the roads. Well, the wagon ruts in the roads were from the chariots, the Roman chariots. So the Roman chariots were designed with the width of 2 horses in mind. So what we're using in 2,000, 2,500 years later is a measurement that is based on the width of 2 horses from 2,500 years ago. And if you carry that out further, it's the space shuttle actually had elements of it that were designed to be lifted by rail. So they were designed because of the width of 2 horses' butts from 2,500 years ago. So he came into an industry that has I would say, not a natural inclination to change and grow for very fundamental reasons, for cultural reasons, for a wide variety of things. And he has enacted a lot of change. He has approached things very differently, but he has also managed to gain the support internally from folks that may normally have an attitude of, I've been doing this for 30 years. Why should I do it? So having dinner with Joe, understanding what that paradigm looks like, how he approached it, how he has been able to keep things moving in the same direction, and quite frankly, manage the frustration that I'm sure comes with that type of change management. Because every time you meet him, every time you see him, every LinkedIn picture, every newscast, whatever, he's happy, he's smiling, he's not got that grim, fierce, everything for him seems to be a joy. And so I'm just interested in how he was able to do that, how he maintains that positivity, and what some of the insights that he has on managing change within this industry are like, or just managing change in general.
That's interesting. Sounds like he might be a good guest for the podcast.
He may be. I don't know his time, but
well, listen, Brian, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate the insights and the stories from how you gained knowledge and aha moments through your Marine Corps experience and how it translated to you professionally. I found it quite interesting. So thank you very much.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Getting to AHA was brought to you by iResearch. To find out more about us, head to iResearch.com and make sure to search for Getting to AHA in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. And don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.